So over the past 20 years or so, in my work at two foundations, at a digital agency, and at a civic startup, I feel like I've learned the hard way in terms of what works and what doesn't when it comes to communicating data for impact. Especially, a lot of my work is focused on the social sector. Um, so what does make people stand up and take notice and say, yes, I'm going to do something about this when they see a chart or a graph or a data story? And what I've been doing is I've been cataloging all of the lessons that I've learned and putting together a presentation that's based off of it. And partly this is for my own benefit so that when I'm working with clients, I can harken back to these. But a lot of this is so that I can actually express this to clients and share this as a presentation. And I figured, you know what? Why not make this more publicly available as well so that others can, hopefully learn from it. And so that's what this is about. I'm going to do this as a series um, of YouTube videos, basically do it in installments. So let me go through this. And first, before I do, let me share what I do. My abiding interest is really helping social sector organizations communicate with data. I really want to help people that are working on the ground floor make wise, well-informed decisions, which means having good access to data. And in my mind, that also means being really good with communicating those data and being strategic and and understanding what works when it comes to taking data and knowing how to transform that into impact. A lot of the work I do, much of the work I do, is right there in the trenches, working with local communities, and I'm always fascinated by, what I find works and what doesn't work in these kinds of settings. Typically, the tools that I use for my work, they include data storytelling and data visualization, human-centered design. These are all aimed at really humanizing the data and helping the clients that I work with explain complex concepts to individuals that may not be in the know. So this notion of data visualization and creating charts and maps, it had to start somewhere, right? And so typically what I do when I'm presenting this is I'll start with this graph. And it's interesting to me because typically, and understandably so, people don't know what this graph is and what it signifies. You can, of course, look at the title and see, oh, this is about exports and imports from Scotland in the 1780s. It's actually part of an atlas from 1786. But that's not why I'm showing it. We're not all students of Scottish trade history. The reason why I'm showing this is because this graph by William Playfair is credited with being the first published bar graph. And actually, William Playfair did not stop there. He's also credited with creating the pie graph and the trend graph. So quite an accomplishment. And especially when you think it's from someone that we don't know, and yet we use his work every day, whether we're in Excel or Tableau or whatever program we may use. Some people are more familiar with this graph, and this one too, I think, is really an important one when you look at the history of data visualization. This is a graph that was done in 1854 by a man named John Snow, and it's not the John Snow that we think of from the TV show Game of Thrones. This graph was by the John Snow, who's often considered the father of epidemiology. And we might otherwise not have known about this graph or what it is expressing, except for the fact that John Snow made a very important discovery with this. This basically is a graph that's showing cholera in Soho in London. And it was a severe cholera outbreak that hit that portion of London. And people at that time in the 1850s and before, they thought it was bad air that caused cholera. And it was John Snow who determined, no, it's not bad air. It's actually bad water. And in particular, contaminated water that came from that pump right there that was causing cholera, the cholera outbreak. What was amazing from a data visualization perspective is that he decided to, put this on a graph or actually a map to help explain the phenomenon. And that was something new and something very important. So what I like to sometimes think about is the fact that here we are, and it's those quote, discoveries or innovations, they were hundreds of years old. And my sense is, and I'm welcome for people to push back on this, is that we actually haven't made much progress since then in using data to help achieve local impact, such as raising awareness of issues or changing behaviors, informing policies, fundraising for causes, empowering communities. Like, for example, I managed a website for many years, helped manage a website, kidsdata.org, which has tons of wonderful, useful data on child well-being in California. And I always felt that I couldn't succeed when it came to finding ways to engage my fellow parents. I had two young kids at the time, and I couldn't find ways to engage my fellow parents in these data that were telling us so many important things about my community, the county I lived in, the state where I reside. And another site I managed at this time, I was at another foundation, the California Healthcare Foundation, was calqualitycare.org, and it had tremendously useful data on the quality of hospitals and nursing homes. And in this case, I should be clear that I actually didn't manage the site. I misspoke a moment ago. I was the person who was granting the money to the organizations that managed this website. Um, but what we know from this work with calqualitycare.org, tremendous data on the quality of hospitals and nursing homes, but we know that consumers in California and elsewhere were not really clamoring for this information. Uh, so, overall, at that foundation, California Healthcare Foundation, I spent 4 years there and funded about $8 million worth of initiatives to try and solve this issue of getting data used. And that's when I started to think about, we got to really learn about this. We've got to figure out what's going on here. What I came up with is that it historically has taken us so long to find the data and then massage the data. And then we got to analyze the data. And then we've got to build the visualization. And we're so hunkered down in just getting something out the door that there was really no time left over for anything else that we might equate with communicating the data and getting it in, or engagement with the data. And here's the thing, what we know is that data are more readily available now, especially through things like the open data movement. There's powerful tools available to analyze the data and massage the data. There's programming languages that now exist to make the creation of wonderful and amazing data visualization simpler. There's great tools you can use where you don't even need to program to do that. Plus, we're just so much more aware these days of methodologies like design thinking, of saying we have to understand our audience's needs. And yet I find that we're still not quite there when it comes to using data for impact. And it's because, like I said, I feel like we often, I guess, fail at the task of engaging and communicating effectively with data. This is one way that I look at it. Like these days, we often are so focused on the amount of data we have. We talk about big data, or the open data movement. We often will talk about the number of data sets that a government agency is releasing. But raw data on its own does nothing for us collectively. It kind of reminds me of iron ore. That's what this is. Iron ore isn't useful until it's made into steel. And I think of steel as the data equivalent of information. So iron ore into steel, data, raw data, into information. However, here's the thing. I'd argue that just converting data into information is actually not where we need to go. We need to go much farther than that. Steel isn't useful until we actually forge it into a tool, something that's going to be used as building materials, for example, or maybe it's a hammer, a tool that can be used to help us accomplish and do something. And I'd argue it's the same with raw data. Our goal should not be to just turn it into information. Our goal is to forge the raw data that we have into action, into a tool that can achieve change. And I think the way that we do that, in part, is by coming up with successful, time-tested ways of communicating those data so that we can actually achieve results. That's what these videos will be about. Um, and I'm going to stop this one right now. This is meant just as an introduction. If you have any questions or you want these slides, you're welcome to reach out to me. I'll preview the next installment, which is going to be about finding the data and building visualizations. There's a whole craft that goes into successful creation of visualizations. And I'm just going to touch on it a little bit on some things that I think we collectively need to know if we want to communicate those data effectively. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.